Elizabeth will talk to us about from the education perspective. So there's probably a little bit, and again, Elizabeth in the United States, but working globally, right? Elizabeth, you're familiar with what's going on in a lot of different places. And I'll ask you the same questions, what has been required of you with your company in terms of changes based on the industry and, laws and regulations. And I can see there's a lot of dialogue around that. And then have you had to, or have you had the opportunity to develop any new programs, creative programs, or based on these laws or new processes? And I'd like for you to also speak a little bit about the actual basic issue of schools opening. I mean, I know we can't, that's maybe for the future, we can't really, the future question, we can't predict it. But I think how that works with relocating families and the parents. And so take it away.
Okay. Well, thank you, Peggy. Thank you, everybody. I think that our service line is a little bit different from, for example, corporate housing and DSP, in that a lot of our work has always been done remotely or behind the scenes. And while we might meet with a family face-to-face or maybe accompany a family on a school visit, the bulk of our work in terms of recommending schools and being the liaison with schools and advocating for families was always remote. And so really where the changes have existed for us is in what schools have had to do. And obviously, first of all, given the fact that they were closed and that the entire concept of education, what that looks like, how it's delivered, has had to change and is continuing to change. And that obviously is a huge topic, and I'll try to touch on that. We really have had to, our role has been not so much to change our processes, but acknowledge this huge change in education and the additional level of uncertainty that families have been going through. So in that sense, our services have kind of just had to be more flexible, in that instead of always providing a traditional school finding service, counseling families on curriculum and how to go home in the future, we had many more families who were sort of saying, I really don't know what I'm doing, and help me choose an online learning program. Or I really don't know, should I enroll here or should I just go home? And what would it look like if I went home versus if I did this? And so we just sort of, our first move was to simply say, we'll just roll with it, with whatever a family needs. Our directive now to ourselves is to problem solve with them, and not necessarily to sort of try to fit each service into that menu that is our go-to menu. And I think that, and you've all talked about the very human component of this, and whether it's in corporate housing, finding the balance of letting people know that the apartment is clean, but not freaking them out, or, having that human touch with them, that human interaction. When it comes to kids and schooling, I've always said, those of you who've ever heard me say anything have probably heard me say this, that it's the most emotional component of relocation, and it's often infused with guilt. Like, am I moving? Is this relocation putting my child at a disadvantage? Or I'm uprooting my child again. So it's always been emotionally loaded. And now all the more so, because parents are choosing schools without ever having seen them. And so, whereas before they were kind of taking their best shot and hoping that this would be a good possibility for their child, now, they're taking a virtual tour and they're making that decision for their child. So our role has, I think, the consultative, if you look at our role as partly sort of logistical, but I think our thing has always been our consultative piece about education. The importance of that piece has increased. Families haven't been able to see the schools themselves, so they're more reliant on us to say, what's the school really like? based on everything I've told you about my child, is this really a good fit? So I think we adapted our services to just be more flexible. We also took the opportunity to do something that we wanted to do, and just trying to be helpful. We created a website, which is kind of a public service website with updates on schooling. First, it was when all the schools were closing. Now it's a reopening. So it's our COVID-19 website. And felt that was a kind of a contribution that we could make. So I think, you know, as I say, our line is a little bit different. We've had to, you know, we've had to sort of follow in all of the changes that schools have made, which have been significant. They already had the capacity to do a virtual tour. Now that's the norm. I do think one change in education is that sometimes admissions was seen as the gatekeeper, and schools have really had to bend over backwards to help families and be flexible with them and say, okay, we know that you can't go and have such and such a test done because there's no testing available right now, so we'll take another teacher recommendation instead. And the pace and the nature of the collaboration between families and schools has often been, I think, healthier. So in terms of the future, wow, that's a really big question. I think that it is inevitable, as Jennifer, Maria have said, you know, you don't, nobody goes through, no business, no industry, no individual goes through something like this without making changes. And then the question becomes, what will those changes, which ones of those changes will stay? And, you know, we were already saying, you know, the theme at one point was disruptors and creativity. And so we just have ramped all of that up, right? And I think in education, online learning was already in existence, and it was already a booming industry. And I think that obviously now it will be that way more so than ever. And right now, schools opening for the fall, when I say fall, you know, Northern Hemisphere, that most of them are planning on multiple fronts. Most of them at this point are planning for some level of in-person presence for children. Most of the European countries are planning on opening in as close to normal a fashion as possible, even if it's with some staggered classes or you know, with greater social distancing and so forth. But all of them are, I think, should be also planning for, okay, we've learned now we need to have an online program on the back burner. And so what will that be? So I think that having some version of online learning will stick with many institutions. For us, it will certainly be an added piece that we will look at when we are visiting and assessing schools. You know, one of our questions will be, how did you look after your student population during COVID? And okay, fair's fair, nobody was prepared, and some schools did it better than others, but now we're all out of the gates. What's your plan for the future if you have to reinstitute that? And that's kind of, for us, a whole new category of school assessment. I think it's possible that the question of enrollment will be redefined. That in the past, you know, you enrolled at a school meant that you showed up at a bricks and mortar institution. And that already wasn't the case with online programs. But even with some of our bricks and mortar institutions, we're beginning to see right now, at least for this year, a kind of a different approach, sort of a family saying, we want to enroll with you. We can't be there September 1, but we are committed to coming. So how about we enroll and we follow you? We join you virtually until January. And then we're there in person after that. And schools are beginning to field those questions. They're dealing with it differently, sometimes based on the fact of whether it's a returning student they already have met in person, or whether it's a brand new student or the age of the child, and they now have to navigate that and create new policies. A lot of the international schools, speaking of policies, are creating new policies in terms of deposit refunds and that kind of thing for families who want to go ahead and look for schooling, but whose relocation may fall through. So those are some changes we've seen. I can keep going indefinitely on the question of education, but I'm aware of time, so.
Well, I think those are really good points. I just wanted, you answered, if you hadn't touched on it, I was going to bring it up about maybe in the realm of advising parents, and of course I know that's a huge part of what you do, with different advice than you might have given.
Yeah.
And I have heard, from a couple of people in the education front that just what you said, it's probably going to change. In the past, when a family, say you're moving mid-year, you might not want to take your child out of the current school. Right. But because the physical going to a new classroom is different. But now people are going to have to learn, aren't they, how to get to know kids with as well as they can without the personal contact initially. And I think that's a very good point, that the advisory consultative part of really helping parents understand that. They probably already do, but understand that that's probably better than keeping them in a disjointed online some days and in school some days situation where they currently live. Just go ahead and start with the new situation that's going to be your new situation.
And we have advised them, we've said, yes, schools are closed, but admissions is open. And admissions has always been open. So please, go ahead and fill out those applications and, make sure you have a spot for September. Don't wait until you find that your assignment is 100% definite. So, go ahead and fill out those applications. And I think also, yes, so parents have, as in all of our fields, they've been more in need of reassurance, more in need of feeling that somebody knows what they're going through and can advise them. I also think it's very different, obviously, for parents with kids of different ages. If you have a high school student who's more self-sufficient, they might need a different kind of prodding. And this is another whole area, those preschoolers, those little kids for whom education, development, as they develop, it's so developmental at that age, and education equals socialization. And without that, they cannot be educated online. They can't be. They have to touch and poke and bite and feel and smell. And that's what they are as a creature at that age. And so, those parents need a different kind of counseling.
Absolutely.
And reassurance from other ones.